Throughout the history of video games, opinions tend to be pretty binary for most titles. Seldom do we see critics and users divided on a title, with some giving it a 10 out of 10, and others rating it below a 5 out of 10. Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time, however, falls squarely within this divisive category. Having played the title during its initial release, as well as replaying it for the purposes of this video, I'm both understanding yet perplexed on how a game this controversial can exist. For those unfamiliar with the Star Ocean series, it's an action JRPG from Triace and Square Enix, taking place far into the future where a galactic federation exists to govern all of space. Many of the sci-fi space tropes are here, including space battles, different human races identified by their planet of origin, and the existence of underdeveloped civilizations on planets behind the technological curve. While the first two games in the series were universally praised, every subsequent entry was scrutinized for one reason or another, whether it be the story direction, technical issues, or just being kind of mid. So, what separates the third entry from its later cohorts? Well, for starters, the third game in the franchise is both praised and ridiculed for all the above reasons, depending on who you ask, that is. The spectrum is wide enough that some champion Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time as being one of the greatest RPGs on the PS2, with others calling it one of the worst. And that's saying a lot considering there's a ton of RPGs during this period contending with both best and worst. What I want to do here today is cut through all of the noise and try to determine once and for all, how good or bad was Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time really? I'll be combing through multiple reviews from both critics and users alike, and addressing as many as I can to see if the praise or complaints are warranted. Please note, however, this is a reflection of my own experience and my opinion, as well as the opinions of those online. Also to note, we'll be using the PS2 English version, which is technically the director's cut of the Japanese original, and only minimal mention of the remastered PS4 version will be included since they're basically the same game. If you love or hate this game, this video is in no way to sway your opinion, but to find common ground and understanding as we dissect this rare phenomenon. Spoilers for Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time. Before jumping into the reviews, a brief synopsis of the story and gameplay should be presented. The year is 772 SD, meaning space state, which equates to the year 2858 AD. The SD calendar system was adopted by Earthlings when they began their space expedition during the events of Star Ocean: The Last Hope. We follow our protagonist, Fate Limegod, a young college student and son of Robert Limegod, a symbological geneticist. While on vacation with his parents and childhood friend Sophia on the planet Haida 4, the planet is attacked by the Vendini, these ugly-looking fish-faced bastards. Currently, we know nothing about their motives for attack, but we are able to escape in this giant ship with Sophia and a traveling circus among others. But we're unable to save our parents, who we later learn were captured by the Vendini. The Vendini then attack the ship that we're on, forcing an emergency evacuation via these one-person escape pods that eventually navigates us to an underdeveloped planet known as Vanguard 3. Fate wants to uphold the UP3, a Galactic Federation protocol prohibiting outsiders from exposing underdeveloped planets to technological advancements, as it's believed that they should naturally progress without any outside influence.
But what about the UP3? Man, what a square!
With that in mind, Fate 3D prints himself a sword for self-defense instead of something like a laser that would clearly be beyond what his planet can produce. From here, we're open to explore at our own pace and start running into non-scripted enemies, as well as Fate's journey to save his parents and find Sophia across the great Star Ocean. Now that the prologue is done, let's talk about the combat system. Combat starts out fairly simple as most RPGs do, with movesets, spells, and customization as the game progresses. Basic combat uses a not-so-subtle rock-paper-scissors design that applies to both the player and the enemies. The X button is used to execute quick weak attacks that can be guarded against, while the circle button is for slow but stronger attacks that can break an enemy's guard. Guarding is performed when hit with a weak attack from an enemy while your fury bar is at 100%. Each attack has a fury cost that helps limit how many attacks you can output before you need to give your character a rest. Standing in place will quickly recover you to 100% fury, which is required for your guard to engage when hit with a weak attack. You're not able to guard while moving, however, as your fury bar would dip to 99% while in motion, making the guard uncheesable. The rock-paper-scissors comparison has guarding block weak attacks, so don't use X on full fury enemies, but weak attacks are quick enough to use in a reaction to strong incoming attacks that are telegraphed, which can cancel said strong attack, and using strong attacks can break through an enemy's guard. Both weak and strong attacks have 3 base variations for each character: a short range, long range, and aerial attack for both X and circle. As you level up, you unlock passive upgrades and special attack that can be equipped to one of the 4 attack types that can be executed by holding the circle or X button instead of simply pressing it. Now that we have a baseline understanding of the game, let's take a look at reviews from 3 major outlets at the time. Keep in mind that the game released in 2003, so I'll be calling out the date of the reviews for further clarity. For those of you who want to read the full reviews, I've left a link in the video description. After that, a thorough look at both the critic and user reviews on Metacritic will be conducted in order to give a wider net of opinions. And finally, the last group to examine will be Reddit to round things out. I'll be cross-examining all reviews and opinions with my own experience to try and pinpoint why exactly Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time is so divisive. Let's start off with IGN's review from August 2004. Keep in mind, this was long before IGN became hated by the masses and was one of the main sources people relied on at the time. First thing to note, IGN gave Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time a 9 out of 10, pretty high up there. The review first outlined the hype of the title, as well as the initial issues in Japan with the merging of Squaresoft and Enix during the development that caused the Japanese release to be riddled with bugs. Although the reviewers state that the bugs were removed for the US release, I feel like the combat is not as polished as he's making it out to be. I will say, the quirks that the game has is teetering between the old PS2 charm and being frustrating. He goes on to gush about the battle system, which once again, I think is being a little bit oversold considering we just had Kingdom Hearts come out only a year earlier that has, in my opinion, a much smoother and seamless experience. The reviewer compares the story to games like Xenosaga, but with pacing issues, which I kind of agree with, but that'll be touched on a little bit later in detail. If you go into Star Ocean with the expectations of Xenosaga levels of story depth, you'll be very disappointed, but I understand where the reviewer is coming from. Some mixed opinions on the graphics and art style are brought up with its unique color palette, but looks way worse than later games on the console like Kingdom Hearts 2 and Final Fantasy XII. The complaints about the English voice acting is accurate for some characters, but I feel as though the voice acting was not as bad as they make it sound. Don't get me wrong, the low points are very low.
Oh no!
What is it, Farley?
We have company! I think it's the Dragon Brigade!
Who the hell am I?
The apple don't fall far from the tree. Idiocy must run in the family.
But other times it's really not that bad. Overall, for the game to be rated 9 out of 10, the IGN reviewer must have really loved the combat system, considering there are so many complaints in all the other departments. Moving on to the Honest Gamer's review from March 2006, prepare for some serious whiplash. A scathing 1.5 out of 5 stars with the headline of, "But see, everything else about the game is subpar at best. It's a perfect example of what an RPG shouldn't do." The reviewer opens with a few good things to say, such as the graphics and animations looking nice, and the music being pretty good, but only if you like 80s rock. I find it fascinating that one of the few things praised in this review are the graphics. This is a stark contrast between the last reviewer that gave the game a 9 out of 10, but dinged the score due to the graphics. While I agree that a love for 80s rock would make your enjoyment of the OTS much higher, with tracks like Exploration and Around in the Wilderness. I still find that the non-rock tracks are still pretty good overall, albeit a few tiers below the likes of Nobuo Uematsu. The rest of the review is split up into 5 categories listed as such. Don't create a universe and never use it. Don't introduce characters and never use them again. Don't make dungeons longer than they need to be. Don't fill your sucky dungeons with sucky monsters. And minigames suck. Don't make people play them. So, let's address every complaint and see if they hold up, starting with, don't create a universe and never use it. This section goes on about how Star Ocean breaks every sci-fi and fantasy cliché nearly instantly, which I kind of agree with. I will say though that most clichés would have the protagonist transported to a new world that they're unfamiliar with. Fate is mostly in the opposite camp, however, as he's mostly aware of the wider galaxy, with the inhabitants being unaware of the world around them. There is validity to the stereotype of partnering up with a group of extremely hot ninja chicks, something that the character Cliff even comments on.
If we're gonna cooperate with someone, it might as well be that hot chick over there. Know what I mean? Hey, you gonna introduce me to these fine young ladies? All women, huh? Not that I'm complaining.
But looking beyond that, the lore behind the planet Elicoor II, the planet that takes up most of the game, explains why this is. Simply put, the Kingdom of Aquaria is run by women, based on their religion citing that the gift of fertility under the Church of the Sun God Apris. But I do agree, their battle attire is not very practical and falls into the fantasy trope of half-dressed women. Funny enough, I mostly agree with the headline statement about the game not using the universe it's created very well, but for reasons not mentioned here, but we'll save that for later reviews that address it. For the next item on the list, don't introduce characters and never use them again. This is in reference to there being 10 playable characters, and only 4 of them are relevant to the story based on this review. By my count, I'd say that there's actually 6 characters that are relevant, since it sounds like the reviewer is omitting Mirage, which is fine, and Maria, who is, well, arguably the second most important character behind the protagonist. He continued to rant about Nell, the red-headed ninja who you can argue is only relevant for the first half of the game until you leave Elicoor II. I do agree though that the 3 characters Roger, Pepita, and Adre are 100% irrelevant to the game, but that's kinda normal for RPGs to pad out the roster. But to that same point, 7 playable characters when you can only use 3 in battle is already enough. Also to note, Mirage and Adre as playable characters was added as extra content for the Director's Cut version, which was the only version that we got in the West. This little fun fact becomes noticeable later in the game when all the characters in your party are shown in cutscenes except for these 2. Albel is the odd in-between character that's relevant as a villain that joins your party later on, but the story could have written him in a way that he wouldn't be needed. I find the reviewer's critiques of Cliff and Fate to be overblown since they both get some character development, albeit a bit slower than most games. The reviewer's next complaint, don't make dungeons longer than they need to be. I agree, there's a lot of dungeons and most of them can be a slog to get through. Each dungeon is fairly monotone in appearance, but I like the map layouts and design details that are present, which would have a much larger impact if they were about 30% shorter on average. The last comment about being beat by a cheap boss at the end of each dungeon sounds like a skill issue, I'm not gonna lie about that. If anything, I had the opposite issue of finding the bosses being too easy most of the time. I actually had more of an issue with some of the normal enemies one-shotting party members or stun-locking me into a game over, which was quite frustrating in long dungeons with few save points. Remember, this is a PS2 game, where game overs bring you straight to the main menu. Like I just said, I died a lot to cheap enemies, so I can sympathize with the sentiment. The other complaint here is that the AI for your characters is, well, not smart, to say the least. While you do get a tactics menu to tell each CPU how to play out the fight when you're not directly controlling them, their action can feel quite random at times. This can lead to allies constantly dying and needing to revive them. Combine this with enemies constantly one-shotting you, and you're going to be very frustrated. And now for the final complaint of this brutal review. Minigames suck, don't make people play them. Now before I completely agree with the reviewer here, he brings up item synthesis as an optional thing that you don't need to engage in. I think I figured out why he had a hard time playing the game. I'll rant about item synthesis later on, don't you worry, but for now, let's focus on the real issue at hand. While there's a lot of different minigames that you don't need to engage in, there is one in particular that you have to play very early on in the game. Let's discuss the infamous turtle section. By the time I got to this part in the game, I only had about 4 to 5 hours of in-game time, and it took over an hour to get through this section. Not only that, I was also using a walkthrough to help out with this part. The reviewer claimed that they spent about 5 hours on it. If that's true, that's more than the amount of time it took just to get up to this point. For those who haven't experienced the turtle section, this is not a skill issue. To sum up how this works, you have 5 turtles to pick from that have different pros and cons. Once you pick your turtle, you ride it through these mines that have multiple paths. There's only one path that brings you to the next section. Not only that, but the level of execution needed to pull it off is very rough, and each attempt takes a bit of time reselecting your turtle. Honestly speaking, I have no clue how I got past this part as a kid without the internet. Hands down, worst mandatory minigame ever. I have a feeling that this section early in the game broke the reviewer and created an utter disdain for the rest of his playthrough. Before moving on to the GameFAQs review, I do want to note that there's hardly anything about the combat that's mentioned in this review, other than being cheaply taken out by some enemies. For a score this low, I would have expected some more shade thrown at the combat, which makes this review feel more like a rant with a lot of valid yet overblown points. Last of the major review sites is GameFAQs, reviewing the game in 2022 using the PS4 version. But it's also important to note that the reviewer has played the original version for the PS2 multiple times, noting that there's no difference between the emulated PS4 version and the PS2 version, besides some random crashing on the modern consoles. The reviewer gives the game a middling 7 out of 10, but citing that the combat is more of a 9 out of 10 and the story being a 5 out of 10. Combat and exploration is mostly positive, with only a few minor complaints, such as targeting enemies, which is a common issue for most games during this time period. In terms of the dungeons, a more balanced viewpoint is brought up about how the large maps with few save points being a bright spot for those who love multi-hour long sessions, but can be a drag for players wanting a quick 30-minute experience. Backtracking is also a downside that really irritated me, especially in the castle when rescuing Nell. At the end of the mission, the game could easily have had a cutscene to bring us back to town, but instead, the game has you walk all the way back to the entrance and across the mostly bland-looking landscapes all the way back to town. In terms of the story, the reviewer doesn't have an issue with the main plot and twist in the same ways that fans do about this topic, but I'll be delving into that later on. There is more leeway given to the characters versus the Honest Games review, outlining Fate's development throughout the story of being a stiff goody-do-gooder to finding his own moral compass. I don't quite agree with the praise given towards Nell's development, since her character is pretty binary throughout. Maybe he just had a crush on her like Cliff did.
Might as well be that hot chick over there, know what I mean?
One important point I do agree with on the story's critique is the amount of inconsequential story beats that force their way into the game to pad out the runtime. Two examples of this on Elicoor II are having to go and save Nell when she goes to rescue Tynaeve and Farlene, and having to save Amina in the woods, which also branches off to saving Roger if you find him, the second most pointless playable character in the entire game. For the rescue mission, the writers could have simply have written that Tynaeve and Farlene successfully escaped the Dragon Brigade, making Nell sneaking off unnecessary, thereby making Fate and Cliff rescuing Nell not needed, saving about 5 hours of playtime to save 2 NPCs without much else being accomplished outside of killing off Shelby, a villain that barely got built up to be worth mentioning. As for Amina, her purpose as an NPC is there for a short side story, with the purpose of being an example of the horrors of war and a tool for foreshadowing one of the game's big twists. What didn't need to happen is her going into the woods alone, knowing that she's ill and fainting, making us have to go and rescue her, only for her to die not too much longer into the game anyways. Outside of finding Roger, whose existence holds zero bearing on the game's story, this little filler arc never needed to be in the game, and would shave off another 2 to 3 hours of gameplay. Overall, the GameFAQs review is fairly balanced in praise and criticism, and falls between the other 2 reviews previously mentioned. With that being said, we have a more clear picture of the controversial nature of Star Ocean Till the End of Time. Kind of. Before making any claims on what's causing the divide, let's move on to Metacritic. Here we have both critic reviews and user reviews to look through. While each individual review is pretty short, I feel like this will fill in some gaps and give us a broader sample size of what people's experience and opinions are. While some of these are derived from full-length reviews, I'll simply be looking at the overview shown on Metacritic, especially since most of these older reviews aren't even online anymore. We'll start with the reviews from critics and filter by score. This will allow us to see if there's a trend as we scale down from the well-received down to the disdained. Nothing to really say about the first 10 reviews, ranging from scores of 94 to 90, simply praising the game's combat and story using words like phenomenal, deep, and rich, with only one of the 10 reviews mentioning some story blow in the mid-game. Comparisons with other franchises like Final Fantasy are made, saying it can hang with the big boys, or that there's something here for every RPG fan. I'm sure the reviewer from Honest Gamers would kindly disagree with you. The next range of reviews includes 28 reviews scoring the game between an 80 and an 89, which still mostly praises the game in total, with some caveats about the combat not being for everyone, noting that it can feel like a chore at times, boring maps, and complaints about companion AI. Funny enough, most of the dings on the scores have been towards the combat, with only a few mentioning issues with the story, which is a stark contrast of the full reviews that we looked at earlier. Looking ahead at 14 mixed reviews between the scores of 70 and 79, here's where things start to feel a bit messy. Nearly every review in this section has some complaint about Star Ocean Till the End of Time, but there's no consistency between them. Some complain about the story but love the combat, while others love the story but complain about the gameplay. One thing to note, however, is that we start to see issues about the game's balance at different points in the game, which I definitely felt during the second half of my playthrough. Enemies like these spider tanks and stupid balls would annihilate my party at full health, while other enemies in the same dungeon would be a breeze. I will say that by the time I was playing some post-game content, I stumbled upon one specific mechanic that may or may not have made the frustrating difficulty spikes more manageable had I known about it. I think this is a common experience that happens because there are so many nuances to the game, both in and out of combat, that heavily impact the experience and are hardly explained or not at all. The mechanic in question is how to combo moves together that applies a massive damage multiplier. I only learned about this online while in the Maze of Tribulations, a bonus dungeon after beating the main story, and it changed everything. To make sure I wasn't stupid, I asked both my brother and one of my friends who've beaten the game if they knew about this, and both had no idea how to do it, but did note that they would sometimes see the attack cancellation multiplier, but didn't know how to do it on command. So let me explain how this works. When using any of the 4 basic attacks or a special attack, you can chain it to a different attack by timing the execution as the animation for the previous attack is finishing, as long as you have enough fury in your gauge. The second attack in the chain gets a 1.75 times multiplier, a third attack gets a 2 times multiplier, and the fourth attack gets a 2.5 times multiplier. That, and it became abundantly clear that some of these special moves were designed in a way to be comboed together just like a fighting game. Considering the impact of a mechanic like this, you'd think that it would be talked about in the earlier parts of the game when you start getting special moves to make use of it. I wouldn't be surprised if people praising Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time were able to utilize all the mechanics of the game, while others who missed most of the finer details of combat loathed fighting. The guarding system is more complex than meets the eye, and character stat customization is hardly explained. Tomes can be used to teach spells to characters that don't naturally learn them to be more dynamic party members, and previously mentioned item creation can severely alter how difficult your journey will be. And oh boy, item creation and synthesis are both deep and frustrating, but somehow simple and enjoyable at the same time. Don't worry, I have so much to say on that, just you wait. Back to the mixed reviews, some bring up pacing issues, which is best highlighted here, saying that the medieval sections being 70% of the game, making the experience a solid long game instead of a shorter, awesome RPG. Refer back to my rant about the needless areas in Elicoor II, and the statement completely checks the box. I also don't blame people who love this game for not noticing this issue, because the smaller story regarding the war on this planet honestly sucked me in to the point that I forgot about the greater narrative until the Vendini showed back up. It isn't until you've replayed the game with the later twist in mind, or when looking at the pacing in retrospect, that this issue becomes apparent. But now we have the last 3 critic reviews, which includes a 60, a 50, and a 42, and funny enough, there's not much being said here. To sum it up, they simply say that if this is your type of game, you'll like it, and if not, you won't. The worst thing said in these 3 reviews is that it simply doesn't hold up to other RPGs of the time like Final Fantasy X and the Xenosaga series. The statement is subjective, but fair, although I don't know if that really warrants the low scores. While I did want to dive deeper into some of these reviews to see if there's any other complaints, these sources unfortunately no longer exist 20 plus years later. I will note that critics who write reviews for publications are doing this as their career, which might be a reason for them to hold back and sanitize their opinions. The same, however, can't be said for Metacritic's user reviews, which we're about to dive into using the same format. Before examining the user reviews, I do want to note that user scores use a 1 to 10 scale versus the critics using 1 to 100 scale. However, simply multiplying the score by 10 won't give the best comparison since the 1 out of 10 score has no decimal points. Right off the rip, we see 8 users giving the game a 10 out of 10. Now, if these were scored out of 100, I'm sure some of them would be like 98s or 95s, so keep that in mind. Nevertheless, it's still impressive considering this is out of 17 reviews in total. 5 more users score a 9 out of 10, with not a single person giving it an 8, as it jumps straight down to 2 7s, a 6, and a 4. So the game is tilted to being great, with a heavy 76% giving it a 9 or a 10. Now, let's see why this is. At first I expected the 9s and 10s to just blindly gush about how great the game is, but the explanations stood out in a way that critic reviews never could. Stories of borrowing the game then playing it again in 2017, or how no other JRPG has this many what the fuck moments. These anecdotes paired with dispelling some of the negative buzz surrounding the title is what made some of these top-rated reviews stand their ground pretty firmly. A good amount of these reviews also discuss their love for the sheer amount of content that the game has on offer. Over 100 plus hours just to beat the main story and 3 bonus dungeons that will also slap you around pretty damn hard. For comparison, I had 54.5 hours on file after the credits rolled, and almost 68 hours after beating the first bonus dungeon, the Maze of Tribulations. I didn't continue on to the other 2 dungeons, however, because I knew that every new challenge scales even harder than the last, with the final secret boss Freya still being a challenge at max level 255. For reference, my party was only about level 101 at this point. Others mention private actions, as there's 10 different sub-endings depending on the private actions that you engage in, as well as other factors. Others would bring up battle trophies, which were basically just trophies before trophies in video games were a thing. These trophies, however, were for crackheads that had insane requirements, like beating the final boss at level 1, beating the secret boss Ethereal Queen without taking any damage, or 1,000,000 button presses, which, for context, 1,000,000 seconds is about 11.5 days. But what surprised me the most about these positive reviews is the acknowledgement that this game isn't as impactful as Final Fantasy X or Xenosaga, but it shouldn't be compared to anything but itself. It's different, and that's okay. This is the sentiment that a lot of fans had. Even to this day, I've never played a game that hits the same way that Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time does in almost every aspect, which is a rare phenomenon among any artistic medium. While I do think this discovery answers a portion of the questions we originally sought after, it's still not the whole picture. Looking ahead to the 2 sevens, they both struggled with weird difficulty spikes that came out of nowhere, which I can relate to. While this didn't happen very much during the first half, the second half of the game throws insanely strong enemies at you upon entering some new areas. Just getting through a few normal encounters can drain you of so many resources that you'll need to head back to town and restock multiple times, if that's even an option. For context, items like blueberries and blackberries restore 30% of max HP and MP respectively, but you can only hold 20 of each. There are other items that can be used in battle that do the same thing, but the 20 item limit still remains. Sometimes a hit from an enemy will take out more than 30% of a character's health in just one hit, or just straight up kill them. Did I also forget to mention that you need a fresh sage in order to revive characters in battle for 30% of their max HP and MP? Yeah, you can also only hold 20 of those too. There's been times where I'd use nearly 10 fresh sages in a single fight because they would continuously die 5 seconds after reviving them. Oh, and by the way, there's a party-wide cooldown between item uses, so sometimes they'll die before you can even use another one again. So why do I keep wasting revives? Because I don't like the idea of having my last standing character get one-shot, resulting in me losing hours worth of gameplay. Shit. It's a frustrating experience that made me stop playing altogether at different points, wanting to just play something else. This must be how the reviewer giving Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time a 6, venting his frustrations not only about the combat issues, but also the lack of environments beyond Elicoor II felt. They bring up a unique quirk to the Star Ocean series about how losing all of your MP also kills you. To be fair, enemies can also die from having no MP as well, giving you an alternate way to beat some enemies that have large health pools with small MP ones. More times than not, however, the mechanic works against the player. HP is also used for some special attacks as well, making both vital stats necessary resources for both offense and defense. If you're not paying attention to your HP and MP, you might use too much and die to something stupid. One way of looking at this from a balance standpoint, however, is that characters like Cliff, who are usually pretty tanky, are vulnerable to enemies that drain MP. The last review that we're going to look at that gave the game a 4 on Metacritic is originally in Spanish, so I have it translated here. This covers the last type of player who doesn't look at Star Ocean very fondly, the veteran RPG player that started with the first 2 games before playing this one. Most fans of the series praise Star Ocean 1 and 2, mainly 2, as the definitive best in the series, no questions asked. While I never played the second game myself, I played some of the first on PSP and I can definitely understand the hype. In only a few hours, I was blown away by what was happening in the story, something that nearly took Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time 25 hours to do. Other complaints that they had included unclear directions after major events with oddly specific requirements to progress. I can relate to this because every so often, the game would drop me off into a main town after a cutscene, only to be thinking, what am I supposed to be doing again? Even as early as the game Prologue, I had to talk to nearly every NPC available twice just to somehow trigger a cutscene after 5 minutes of skipping through dialogue from some fox girl and a penguin man. Although the sample size of the user reviewers on Metacritic was small, I do think it covered a lot of the more objective pros and cons that the game has. But in order to get down to the true unfiltered opinions of Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time, we'll have to take a look into the dark abyss that is Reddit. Since Reddit goes deep into specifics about the story, I find it necessary to give a summary of the events of the game from start to finish, while also addressing specifics that tie back to some of the story complaints and praises from earlier reviews. With that being said, let's talk about the story. Despite my effort to sum things up into a nicely condensed package, this game has about 10 hours of cutscenes for the main campaign. I'll be weaving in my opinions about specific story plots and pacing that have been hinted at in the reviews already discussed. Continuing from when Fate escaped the ship that was under attack, he lands on Vanguard 3, an underdeveloped planet, and does what he can to not break the UP3, which stands for Underdeveloped Planet Preservation Pact. He makes it to a small town where he's saved by two orphans, Nicholas and Mina, who are skeptical of Fate since his ears and clothes look strange to them. This is because someone named Norton showed up one day and killed their parents with what sounds like a laser whose ears and clothes look like ours. Fate promises to fix their music box for saving him, but finds out that his ship was stripped for parts. Nicholas tries to confront Norton's gang, so naturally we have to go and save him, where we find out that Norton was a criminal to be exiled until the transport ship crashed here, where he killed the ship's crew and decided to be the ruler of the land with his advanced technology. Held at gunpoint, Fate's head starts glowing with strange symbols before someone named Cliff comes to save the day. After the fight, we free Nicholas and get abducted by Cliff, a member of a resistant group called Quark, along with Cliff's companion Mirage. This is a decent opening that helps world build in a short period of time, but nothing that happened on Vanguard 3 has any real bearing on the story moving forward. A lot of dialogue arguing about why they want Fate, where his dad is, and Cliff just saying you have to talk to our leader. On our way to Quark's leader, we get attacked by a Vendini ship and have to use gravitic warp to basically warp to a random location in space where we have to make an emergency crash landing on a planet called Elicoor II. When people complain about there being too much medieval setting, it's because of this planet specifically, where you'd be spending most of your time in the game. I do think that having too much time on this 15th century style planet does take away from the fact that there's nearly an infinite amount of planets that could be interesting to visit that we never get to go to. In fact, out of the 6 different planet-like areas that you can visit in the game, 4 of them collectively take up about less than 20% of the playtime that you will have in the main story. When we do crash land, it's in the middle of a city, where Mirage hides on the ship to escape later, while Cliff and Fate are taken prisoner. We get tortured to reveal information since the city suspects that we're working for the opposing faction in an ongoing war. The war between the Kingdom of Eriglyph, the kingdom that we crash landed in, and the Kingdom of Aquaria. A mysterious woman named Nell breaks us free and wants us to help aid Aquaria in the war. After some smooth talking, she's convinced that we're from the country of Greeton, where many engineers live. Sadly, we never get to see Greeton, which I'd suspect is populated by individuals not native to Elicoor II based on some foreshadowing that we see later. After escaping the city, we ride in the back of a carriage where most of the details are devolved about the war, as well as a basic explanation of symbology, which is Star Ocean's magic system that's somewhat rooted in science. Cliff gets excited when told that Aquaria is run by women, while Fate complains about not wanting to make a weapon for them. During this exchange, the carriage gets attacked by Eriglyph's Dragon Brigade. We slip out of the carriage to escape while supporting cast Tynaeve and Farlene act as a decoy. From here, we slowly make our way east to Aquios, the capital of Aquaria, stopping to rest at each town along the way where more details about the war happen as well as some general character development. While sleeping at an inn, Nell runs off into the night to save Tynaeve and Farlene, so Fate and Cliff go to rescue her and the others. During this time, Albo the Wicked is introduced as some depraved yet skilled warrior from Eriglyph. After a successful rescue, we head to the next town where we meet a girl named Amina who looks exactly like Sophia, Fate's childhood friend from earlier. Here we get another rescue mission as Amina went off into the woods despite being sick, before finally making it to Aquios to meet the Queen. Before continuing, let's look at how long it took to get here. Right before leaving Vanguard 3, I had about 2.5 hours of in-game time, but now, just entering Aquios, I'm at nearly 12 hours. That's about 9 hours of gameplay and cutscenes just to get from Eriglyph to Aquios, with a lot of random detours and dialogue that does help paint a better picture of the current war, but don't forget that Fate and Cliff have no business being here. This isn't their fight or their story, but the game ingrains it in a way that you forget that you're just trying to leave to find your dad. In reality, you're just playing along until someone comes and finds you. I do respect the conflicting nature of helping those you have no business helping and the morality of building a super weapon to end a dragged out war at the cost of many lives, but the way it's laid out can be cumbersome. This could still have been achieved by cutting that 9 hours in half by omitting the 2 rescue missions and that damn turtle section. After agreeing to help with the weapon, it's concluded that the iron wiring needs to be swapped for copper, but the copper mines are swarming with dragons in Eriglyph territory. We pave a way for copper to get mined, as well as fight Albel, who we run into, which hurts his pride after being beaten by a couple of random dudes. Back in Aquios, Mirage randomly shows up with Amina having collapsed outside the city gates. After getting her to an inn, we learn that Eriglyph is launching a full-scale invasion as they've caught wind of the weapon Aquaria has been building. Amina wakes up and lets us know that she's trying to find an old friend in Aquarius, who just so happens to be the head of research for the Thunder Arrow, Dion. Now in the front lines of battle, we engage with the military leader Vox, but during the fight, Vox gets evaporated by a Vendini ship that finally tracked us down. Both sides turn their attention to the Vendini, but are easily overpowered by their ship. Casualties are high, with bodies scattered about. When Fate realizes that the Vendini are after him due to a slip-up from Cliff, he has an emotional breakdown, followed by an ethereal glow in which a beam of light engulfs the Vendini ships as it seemingly vanishes before Fate collapses to the ground. At this point, the pacing has gone from a slow collection of detours without much progression to everything happening all at once. It's a bit of whiplash, but creates a powerful turning point as the main story plot rears its head out of nowhere. Now, the Kingdom of Eriglyph and Aquios have a common enemy, right at the climax of the conflict. Not only that, but Amina and Dion finally reunite as they're both on the brink of death, Dion from the battlefield and Amina from her illness. Holding each other's hands, they both die together, which is a pretty dark turn for what's been a fairly lighthearted story thus far.
Amina! No!
When a second ship starts to descend from the sky, Fate wants to give himself up to prevent any more deaths. Before they decide what to do, another ship shoots it down, which is piloted by Maria, the leader of Quark, whom Cliff and Mirage are a part of. From here on out, most of the story is directly connected to the main plot, which in retrospect feels like most of everything you've done up to this point has been relatively pointless. It was great for character development and world building, although the world building has been completely reserved for Elicoor II, a planet that holds no important significance, save for one thing that's revealed later on. Maria gives quite the information dump to Fate, letting us know that his dad conducted forbidden experiments on him and Maria, which granted Fate the power that deleted the first Vendini ship. Maria provides us proof of her statements by showing us how she can alter matter within objects. Maria's motive for rescuing Fate and Fate's dad is in order to find out why they were experimented on. Fate's destructive capabilities also explains why the Vendini want to capture him, as he's the ideal superweapon. Maria explains the situation to the Queen of Aquaria, who grants them permission to use the Thunder Arrow against the Vendini. Before finishing the conversation, however, we're interrupted by yet another side quest. The Vendini that managed to survive have infiltrated the underground temple called Kadan that holds the Sacred Orb, something that Aquarius sees as a holy relic. The group identifies this as an OPA, or out-of-place artifact, an item that's more technologically advanced than anyone in the galaxy can comprehend. Yet another long dungeon later, and the orb is protected. While this feels like another unnecessary side quest, the OPA in question does hold significance later on in the story. Fate finds Maria sitting outside where they have a long conversation that results in a flashback of her discovering her powers and being saved by Cliff and Mirage, which shows us that Cliff was the founder of Quark initially. Quark was founded to help planets that were unjustly treated by the Galactic Federation, but are seen as a terrorist group since by nature they're against the standing government. It was during an altercation that Maria awoke into her powers that had Cliff step down as their leader. Back in the audience hall, we learn that Eriglyph and Aquaria agreed to form an alliance against the Vendini, with them offering the use of their air dragons for battle. On the way to the rendezvous with the King of Eriglyph, some soldiers still wanting to fight the war try to stop us, as well as running into Pointless Roger yet again, who joins us if we saved him earlier in the forest. At the meeting, it's agreed that Albel will join us as we have to subdue the Marquis, a massive dragon that can carry the Thunder Arrow, so that way it can be in range of the Vendini ships. We find Albel imprisoned under charges of treason from Vox before he died for letting us escape the 2 times that we encountered him, but will be acquitted if he helps us. This is yet another situation where the inclusion of Albel as a playable character was something that was not needed, as his role as an antagonist similar to Vox is irrelevant at this point in the story outside of being an Ariglyph representative. We beat the Marquis in combat, to which the dragon agrees to help us. An epic showdown between the Vendini and us takes place where we drive them back with the assistance of an unknown source emitting powerful blasts that cannot be comprehended. We finally say goodbye and leave Elicoor II, as now the 2 warring kingdoms find peace through this ordeal. We also learn that multiple groups are under attack by this unknown source, being the next evolution in the constantly changing story. This here marks the halfway point in the game's main story as we switch over to Disc 2. Back in space, Maria informs us that we're on our way to negotiate with the Vendini to get Fate's dad back. An exchange is agreed upon for hostages between Fate and Fate's dad, although Quark and the Federation have no intention of letting the Vendini have either of them. And guess where this exchange takes place? The training facility on Elicoor II, the same place that we saved Tynav and Farlene. It's almost like we never left. A shootout occurs where the NPCs that we brought along with us get killed immediately before we win the fight. The group retreats into the facility, where Fate and Maria start asking Robert about the experiments, with his reasoning being that it was to protect the universe from a greater threat. Headed back to the roof, one of the 3 Elicoor II party members will come to the rescue, with Nell being the default. However, I got Albel coming to the rescue because of an optional event that triggered earlier in the game, before he eventually gets shot in the shoulder. Robert also gets shot, pushing Fate out of harm's way, with his dying words being to go to Moonbase to find the answers that we're looking for. The team agrees to head to Moonbase with Albel insisting to join the team. This could easily have been Nell or Roger depending on choices that you made earlier in the game. Now, on a Federation ship, we're debriefed on what's happening in the universe right now with those bursts of energies from earlier. During the time between the attack on Haida 4 and leaving Elicoor II, a new threat from over 50,000 light years away started to attack with power far beyond anyone's comprehension. A message stating that they're the Executioners, beings that serve the Creator and are punishing the universe for delving into forbidden research. Defense stations are reported to be obliterated by these beings, with a transmission from one of these defense stations hinting that the Executioners were gods. So, at this point in the game, our concerns have escalated from worrying about a war on a random planet to a full-scale threat of the universe being wiped clean from divine intervention. Quite the stark contrast from Disc 1 to Disc 2, I'd say. While this change in tone is sudden, this is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of why some love and hate the story. Upon reaching Moonbase, the Executioners have started their attack, with the first on-screen visual looking quite terrifying. A living beast, flying through space, strikes fear into the crew still aboard the Federation ship, now viewing them as the gods that they claim to be. We run into Pepita, a playable side character from among the circus group back on Haida 4. While she did help us at the beginning of the game, her existence holds no further bearing on the story at this point. A little ways into the Moonbase, she inserts herself into the party just like Roger did, adding yet another pointless party member. When we're ready to leave Moonbase though, we can choose to take her with us or leave her behind. If we leave her here, we can revisit Elicoor II and recruit one of the 2 other party members that we left behind. I opted to leave Pepita here in order to get Nell later on, since she can use healing spells on the bench. While exploring the base, the first fight with an enforcer ensues, as it claims that we're a plague and irregularities need to be purged from the galaxy. It's at this point that we experience one of the first big power spikes in difficulty, but at least it's on brand for an enemy that's supposed to be hyped up as much as it is. I mean, it would be weird if they were just as easy to kill as just a regular soldier. When the team finds the lab, Maria uses her genes to unlock the data that they've been looking for in the form of a video diary, leading to yet another big revelation. The video is nearly 20 years old, documenting the events from year 752 SD. While on a planet called Styx, Robert and his colleagues discovered a time gate that appeared to be able to travel through time. Further research on the planet was conducted, with data being extracted from the gate through the use of symbological data. The results of the data revealed that 4D beings with the capability to control time exist. and are responsible for creating the universe with symbology being a scientific property native to them. It was soon discovered that the time gate wasn't simply a time machine, but a gate into 4D space itself, a portal between the creator and its created universe. The researchers were ecstatic, that is, until the time gate spoke to them.
Resign thyself.
Doctor, the time gate.
What seemed to be a warning was actually a sentence to all living life, a judgment for their crimes. The gate informed them that the creator will send their executioners to the Eternal Sphere, the name they call our universe. And the crime? Researching too far into symbology to the point that the creator feared that that same technology would be used against him. Upon hearing their fate, the research team chose to fight instead of lying down and dying, as the gate warned that the beings of the Eternal Sphere are far too gone to stop now. Although we already knew that fate held the power of destruction and Maria alteration, we learned that there was a third child to be genetically altered as well. Sophia was given the power of connection, that being the ability to cross over into 4D space. So simply put, Sophia has the ability to cross over into 4D space, Maria the ability to maintain their physical state within 4D space, and Fate the power to destroy God himself. So now that the mission is to cross over into the realm that God resides and kill him, the game may feel like a stereotypical JRPG, but with a space-themed coding. But just you wait, the twist hasn't even come yet. Back on deck, a one-sided space battle plays out on the projectors. Entire fleets obliterated in a single blow.
Is coming from an enemy executioner. The reaction is in excess of energy magnitude 3. No, wait, magnitude 4.5. There's no stopping it!
Is this the will of the Creator? Are our sins so unforgivable?
Even Fate's mouth hangs open in utter shock, witnessing the raw power of the executioners. With this happening nearby, the captain of the Federation ship has the team evacuate via a space shuttle while they lure the executioners away. The Federation crew is willing to give up their lives just so we have a chance of reaching 4D space. The feeling of hopelessness washes over as we see the Federation ship we just escaped from get crushed out of existence. Upon reaching our destination, the planet Styx is crawling with executioners, beings that resemble the holy and demonic figures of a desolated wasteland. The buildup is immense, as it feels like we're nearing the climax. Soon will be a clash with the creator of the universe. Had this been the final big reveal, and the game continued on this specific path, I think the game's story would be far less controversial, minus being on Elicoor II for most of the game. I remember feeling a sense of dread, and almost fear, which is rare in a JRPG to have. But once the group finally reaches the time gate on planet Styx, well, let's just say that this is the single moment that broke the fanbase into two camps. Those who absolutely loved it, and those who think that this twist not only ruins, but invalidates not just Star Ocean till the end of time, but the entire Star Ocean franchise, past, present, and future. Upon reaching the gate, Sophia opens up a portal once she's able to manifest her power, and after a little hesitation, the team jumps through. Whatever it was that you were expecting to be on the other side, well, it was probably wrong. Fate and friends emerge from a projection screen in what looks like a simple but futuristic looking town. If anything, this looks more normal here than anywhere else that we've seen in the game so far. A kid named Vlad casually walks up to us, inviting us to his house so he can explain everything. There, the kid continues to be pretty flippant about the whole situation as he confirms that we're from the Eternal Sphere. He then shows us a display of the events that we just witnessed with the executioners. but it looks like we're watching a sci-fi action movie instead. When questioned, Vlad lays it all out pretty directly. The Eternal Sphere, the universe that all of Star Ocean exists in, is a simulated video game with advanced AI, and we are the AI.
Say what?
Our known universe is a video game, and we're the NPCs. The executioners that we felt an almighty divine presence from, the followers from God, were just programs to clean up bugs. Except we're the bugs because we became so advanced that we're able to figure out how to manifest into 4D space, with 4D space being considered the real world. Now that is a lot to take in as security breaks in to arrest us after Vlad's mom snitched us out. From here, the tension that's been built up is completely deflated, both from the lowering of the stakes and the sitcom-like atmosphere as we hear Vlad's mom lecturing him after we just beat the shit out of a bunch of trained police forces like they were paper. Even more whiplash is felt heading to Gemini, a city that's basically a never-ending Eternal Sphere LARPing session. Here, we're able to use the terminal to go back to the Eternal Sphere with Sophia's connection ability. We can revisit 4 areas from the game previously: Vanguard 3, Elicoor II, Moonbase, and Styx. 3 out of these 4 planets have little to no purpose revisiting. That's right, the rest of the game is almost exclusively on Elicoor II and 4D space. We're going back, baby. Using the transporter, the group agrees pretty quickly that they're just programmed with little resistance to the thought. Cliff hits us with the quote, "I think, therefore I am," and we just kind of move on with the mission at hand. It is refreshing though to have a character roster that doesn't constantly dwell on philosophical dilemmas, especially Maria and Cliff, even Albel at times. Of course, the rich college kids suffer from this while the hardened warriors just get their shit done. During our visit to Elicoor II, we swing by and pick up Nell since we left Pepita behind, and the most pointless character in the entire game, Adre. Who is he? I don't know. Why is he joining us? I don't know. After this, we don't see him in a single cutscene except the epilogue scenes, further proving that his existence is completely pointless. Heading to the Sphere Company, the corporation responsible for the Eternal Sphere, we're confronted at the entrance and beat the security guards. Further in, we're assisted by a friend of Vlad's named Blair, who's one of the many developers that believe there should be no interference with the Eternal Sphere, as many people believe that it's developed into its own parallel universe now. We're given an uninstaller to remove the executioners, however, when used, it summoned a new enemy instead called the Convictors, a creepier and more powerful version of the executioners. This occurred because the owner that we now know as Luther put them in as a security measure. Now Blair tells us that we need to find the owner within the Eternal Sphere using an OPA. Hey, wait a minute.
You described that is too technologically advanced for this planet. It's even beyond our ability to identify.
What?
It may be a so-called out-of-place artifact, or OPA.
Yep, it's the Sacred Orb. So now we have to go back to everyone's favorite planet, Elicoor II. Not only that, but the dungeon we have to go through is Kadan, the same dungeon that we went through earlier to rescue the Sacred Orb. But it's not entirely the same dungeon, because now we have these stupid ball things that keep killing me. I know this is the story section, but I just need to take a moment and say that this part of the game was such a massive grind fest just to get strong enough to get by. And even then, it was a struggle. Now that we have the Sacred Orb, or the OPA, we have to use it on a gate in the Moselle Dunes, yet another area that we've already been to. It's continuing to feel like the developers are running out of time or money for the last bit of the main campaign and defaulted on recycling more environments like Elicoor II instead of making a new planet or section. After opening the gate in the Moselle Dunes, the team finds themselves in what looks like the insides of a firewall if they were to physically exist. At the end of the firewall-like dungeon, we've entered into an ethereal-like area floating in space. Upon reaching the top, some beautiful imagery of giant doors and clocks are on full display with Luther, the creator, standing among everything. The classic philosophical dilemma of are they just programs or are they just like us ensues, with neither side budging. In many ways, this is still parallel to the traditional God versus his creations, but with a different flavor. What's even more interesting that supports this narrative is the naming conventions of the Eternal Sphere developers being Luther, as well as 3 others that we defeated that were high up in the Eternal Sphere named Azar, Belzebur, and Burial. All 4 of these names that want to destroy the Eternal Sphere are adjacent to biblical names of the devil, which is also seen as a false god. very fitting as Luther himself is playing God, believing that he has the right to wipe out all of his creations that have gained sentience. This is where the final boss fight takes place in 2 phases. After the first phase, Luther loses his mind, trying to delete the entire universe even though he's still present within it.
Die! 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 Be gone, everyone and everything! Righteousness shall prevail!
Once the battle is won, the world around us starts to dissipate as the pendulum of time stops in place. This moment is the end of time. Whole planets vanish before our eyes as it looks like we're too late. The bodies of our characters start to glow and become translucent. Throughout this process, however, they believe in their existence as the cliche cheesy power of friendship-like speeches come through. Somehow everyone is still alive and everything exists again, using some mental gymnastics about perception to explain what happened, until Cliff says, "Hey, it doesn't matter, we're still here, and that's what matters." A little more talking, and then we see the credits roll. An emotional, philosophical, and convoluted ending to an emotional, philosophical, and convoluted story. After the credits roll, we see each character's epilogue with a potential shared ending between Fate and any of the other characters, but unless you're using a guide, you're more likely to end up getting the Fate solo ending like most people do. The epilogues are a nice touch to soften the blow of an overall weak ending. But why did Adre get so much screen time at the end? I do think it's funny though that if you don't find Roger, you get a scene of him still trapped in a cage where you're supposed to find him. And that is the very brief, abridged version of Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time. So, that's the plot for Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time, with some light commentary all in about 24 minutes and change. It's honestly a lot to take in, with there being stories within stories within stories. First, you're fleeing an invasion, then you're looking for your dad through space, participating in a full-blown war between kingdoms, to space battles, then suddenly you're trying to kill God, but now your universe is just a simulation, and you're fighting a massive corporation before all your known existence is wiped out. Except, nah, just kidding, everything's fine. I don't know if I've ever played a game with this many twists and turns in the narrative that incorporate multiple genres of storytelling. A medieval, space sci-fi, magic fantasy, futuristic, scientific, dimension-hopping, dragon-stomping, apocalyptic, philosophical yet analytic RPG cocktail is what this turned out to be. I'll be the first to say that most people are not going to be a fan of at least one of these genres. The only consistent throughput in this equation are a handful of characters that are pretty two-dimensional in personality. I'm not going to say that all these characters are one-note archetypes, but they can be pretty predictable. Fate is the only one to push back on decisions made by the group due to being so naive. Cliff is laid back yet stoic and a bit of a womanizer. Nell just cares about her mission and companions, and Maria is a no-bullshit type of leader. Normally you can get away with a cast of characters like this, but when a story has so many weird peaks and valleys, it's going to need a strong cast to get players through those weird dips in story quality. Overall, I think the story suffers from the weight of its own expectations. This game was meant to stand tall among the best of the best that the PS2 had to offer by having the best of everything all in one, but ended up falling short of most of the promises. It also doesn't help that WatchMojo lists this as the #1 worst video game plot twist of all time.
Relax. I'll explain everything.
It's never good when a video game tries to get too meta, and that's especially true when the game already suffers from shoddy writing. You have to give the writers credit for trying to make things interesting, but unfortunately, the plot twist is horrid.
We're just characters living inside a simulator?
For anyone who forgot what we're doing in this video after that detour, let me remind you that reading Reddit is next on the docket, a place I swore I'd never visit. First, let's visit a thread started 13 years ago and see what people had to say. Overall sentiment about the game is positive, with only a few complaints scattered about. People jokingly quoting lines and attacks, with a lot of praise for the story as a whole, plot twists included. It was only until I got further down the thread that some longtime Star Ocean fans voiced their dislike, and even acknowledged that played a big part in them not liking it. Aside from the universe being a simulation affecting past games' canon, this phenomenon can be seen with the Final Fantasy series. A lot of people don't like Final Fantasy VIII or Final Fantasy XIII and so on, because they started with earlier games and are holding these newer games to the standard of games prior. Simply put, when you have a really good string of games in an anthology, any newer title after that is going to have to surpass the bar that's been raised by the prior titles. Otherwise, they'll be considered a disappointment by the fanbase. I'm not saying that this is the wrong way to feel about a game in a long-running series, but in the case of any franchise that has titles that do not directly link to prior stories, each entry should be evaluated more in a vacuum. Overall, it seems like the game was not as controversial in the early 2010s, but let's see what people only 2 years ago have to say. A user asked, "Is Star Ocean Till the End of Time worth a playthrough?" An edit to this initial post shows that they've received numerous DMs ranging from goated to really bad, further proving the divisive nature of the title. Reading through the thread, however, isn't much different than the one from 13 years ago. Once again, most comments are positive, with some citing the twist as a deal breaker, or that the game is too slow. Further down, one user who's just now leaving Elicoor II at the time of writing found that the combat system was very stiff compared to other action RPGs, bad AI, and too much of the medieval sections. A more universally disliked entry over Till the End of Time, and they haven't even got to the controversial part. Considering this post is from only 2 years ago, the combat is absolutely stiff when compared to the fluid combat system of nearly every modern action RPG. Hell, even Kingdom Hearts that came out before this felt smoother. There are a few that don't like the game in the thread, but still heavily outweighed by fans. It is funny though scrolling through and you see one person saying the following: boring gameplay and terrible story. I'd say pass. You're not missing out on anything. With a person right below them saying, absolutely, best game in the series in my opinion. If this doesn't show how mixed people are in this game, then I don't know what will. The last Reddit thread I want to look at is one titled Star Ocean 3 Hypocrisy, as it gets down to the core of what seems to be the biggest issue: the twist. The user that started the thread brings up how most RPGs that run parallel in themes without the simulation twist are praised, but Star Ocean Till the End of Time is dragged through the mud. The comparisons made are great, but let's dive into what the crowd has to say. Opinions vary quite a bit, but one comparison made a few times is how The Matrix handled this topic, with the twist being early in both the story and franchise, with most of the story revolving around this concept. In Star Ocean, however, this is the third entry, with other themes and plot points completely disconnected from the big reveal. By the time you even get to Moonbase, most of the game leading up to that point feels irrelevant because of the discoveries that are made. This happened yet again once you enter 4D space, making about 70% of the game feel completely unnecessary. Many others point to this being the third game, which inadvertently retcons the first two games that most people herald as the peak of the series. One user had the same complaint that I had with the twist execution being cited as comedy, as well as others stating that it felt like a cheapened experience, which is yet another issue I addressed considering the build-up. And finally, this post on screen delineates the difference between this Star Ocean and all the other Star Oceans that came before and after. It's noted that these themes in other JRPGs aren't usually present within the Star Ocean universe, and that the final stages of this game are completely divorced from anything else that the franchise has been known for. And like other posts that we've looked at, it addresses the fact that the ending of Star Ocean Till the End of Time has had repercussions on the series moving forward, as every entry after this one is nothing more than a prequel that the developers don't seem to know how to address. Simply put, after an ending and twist like this, how can the series possibly progress with an entry that takes place after Till the End of Time? So, after hours of scraping the internet for thoughts and opinions on this controversial game, I think we have a better idea of how to break this down. I want to do one final conclusive analysis of the different game aspects and give my full opinion as someone who's played the game both on release and within the last year. Let's start with combat. At the time, Star Ocean Till the End of Time was in a weird period, where turn-based was still the default battle system, and real-time action was still in an experimental phase. We don't even need to look too far into the future for what this game's combat could have looked like, with Star Ocean The Last Hope releasing in 2009 for the next generation of consoles, having a very polished system by comparison. Once you get into the latter half of the game, combat can be extremely momentum-based through abusing attacks with heavy crowd control to lock enemies down. There have been times where I'll fight the same group of enemies where I can wipe them quickly by locking them down from the start, with other times being the one locked down by them, forcing an awkward cycle of healing just to stabilize the party. Special moves like Fist of Fury and Palm of Destruction are excellent examples of ways to lock down a single enemy. At the time of release, I think the combat can be looked at fondly, but as time has passed, it's quickly shown its flaws. I can't say that it aged like milk, because despite the frustration that came with it, I did have a blast playing it. I was even up for the challenge of tackling one of the 3 bonus dungeons at the end of the game for an added challenge. The depth and customization of combat really did it for me, especially when I started to learn how to properly chain moves together. The difficulty spikes in the second half did take me out of it for a while, but at least when the game presents an otherworldly threat that's supposed to be the end of the world, it's scaled properly compared to a regular soldier. Like I've said before, I suspect that players who didn't fully grasp every aspect of the game's combat were the ones who hated it the most, albeit of no fault of their own. I also want to bring up another game that released on the same year, Tales of Symphonia, another action RPG. But this one had a much lower barrier of entry in terms of combat complexity. In middle school, I remember talking with other kids that played RPG saying that Tales of Symphonia was a better version of Star Ocean, which I can only assume is in reference to the combat system. And to some degree, that is true. Tales of Symphonia had a better balance by not being overly ambitious in this department, further isolating Star Ocean Till the End of Time at a weird point in time. The same can be said when comparing it to its previous entries having much simpler yet effective combat. Personally speaking, I did find it feeling a little bit janky even back then, but mine and many others' tolerance for janky controls in the early 2000s was a lot higher than today. Those janky controls also feel way worse when you're experiencing wild difficulty spikes, which arguably shouldn't happen if you understand how to use everything in the game. While in the Maze of Tribulations, I died a few times to the super boss Gabriel, and wanted to see if leveling up would be worth my time. Each level only increased my base stats by a couple of points, with current stats at that point being in the hundreds or even thousands, with most of it being provided through equipment. With the lower baseline for stats without equipment, leveling up characters in the early game had a material impact on performance in battle, since going from say 40 attack to 43 had a noticeable impact, but when your attack is over 3000, the extra 2 to 3 points does literally nothing. Sadly, buying equipment from the shops will only get you so far, with the real way to keep up with enemy scaling being item synthesis. Let's talk about the crafting system and why it's literally mandatory to master everything if you don't want to struggle. Item crafting gets introduced on the way to Aquarius around the time that you run into Amina for the first time by a woman named Welch, someone who's a reoccurring character in the series related to item creation. To craft items, you first need to find a workstation, in which there are multiple across Elicoor II, and only on Elicoor II. As annoying as this is, the in-universe reason is that you can recruit a large roster of other characters that specialize in different categories of item creation that can make unique items. So, once you're at a workstation, you need to invest money, with higher amounts invested yielding better items most of the time. What's also annoying is the amount invested is random. So, if you're trying to get a specific item, you need to keep going back and forth with the investment amount. With 8 different categories, you can buy the upgrade for what you want to do, and now that workshop is ready. Unfortunately, if you go to a different workshop, you need to repurchase the upgrades, and at this point in the game, you're pretty much broke. So now you're ready to make some new inventions. You can assign up to 3 characters to a single assembly line and choose the category of item creation, with each character having stats related to each category. In most cases, if you want to do some alchemy, you just need to assign the highest alchemy stats and call it a day. Except, Eliza, who is the worst alchemist with only 4 as her skill level, can make some of the greatest items like the Philosopher's Stone. Each character has a list of items that they can or can't make, with some items only being craftable by a single character with bad stats. But does the game tell you this? Nope. But that's okay, just do some trial and error testing and it'll work itself out, right? Nah, cause this shit is expensive. Before you run the assembly line, you have to choose how much money to invest for each attempt, keyword being attempt. When the assembly line starts, you have to wait for this bar to fill up to see if your team successfully made something, which is signified by their portraits, but you don't know what they made until you end the process. Each time it fills, the invested amount is spent, and there is a pretty high chance of failure until you recruit higher level people. To make matters even worse, you have to invest a hefty amount to make anything remotely useful, and most of the time you could have bought something much better at the shop for less money. There were multiple times that I saved up insane amounts of cash, only to burn it all creating items that amounted to almost nothing, which must be how most venture capitalists feel when they invest into multiple startups and they all go bust. And just like dabbling in startups, item creation in this game is a rich person's activity. It's not until you're about 70 to 80% through the game that you can reasonably afford to mess around with item creation. It is pretty useful to create consumables like food and materials early on, because once you make it once, you can register a patent which makes it available to purchase at shops. Because of this, some of the shops have a laundry list of random stuff for sale with a lot of literal useless junk, making it harder to find the items that you actually want to buy. Realistically, I'd say about 5% of all items that can be made are actually worth buying and using, with orichalcum being the most frequently used item I made. So, I know what you're thinking. Why is the crafting system so important? What does it have to do with character stats? Well, it all comes down to one of 8 categories: synthesis. Item synthesis lets you take items like material, accessories, or literal pixies and fuse them into weapons and armor. Each weapon and armor has up to 10 slots of added stats that can be anything from adding an elemental resistance, percentage boost to certain stats, or just a flat plus 500 attack points. What the actual fuck? Yeah, Orichalcum is why all my characters have attack power in the thousands. Yet it still takes a lot of time to kill enemies in the Maze of Tribulations. Just look at how decked out some of these weapons were before I fought Gabriel. Without item synthesis, I'd simply be tickling everything that I fought. But of course, each upgrade costs a fortune, as well as needing to have the materials to synthesize into the equipment to begin with. And for something as critical as Orichalcum, you need at least one of the 2 best alchemists, Misty or Mackwell, and invest between 5100 and 5700 full to yield it. Let's just say you're not getting there without a guide or 100 plus hours of in-game time messing around. I love that there's so many recruitable inventors in the game with unique ways of getting them, but when you have to commit hours upon hours betting on bunny races in order to get the bent sword to recruit one of the best smithers in the game, well, that's just dumb. The entirety of the item crafting system is unique, in-depth, and awesome in theory, but is a pain in practice with a lot of spreadsheets and Google searches required to accomplish anything. Oh, and I almost forgot. Some items that you fuse into your weapons, like pixies, can apply a chance of your weapon breaking when used, literally deleting your weapon from the game. Like, why does this mechanic even exist? Why? And why do people randomly fall asleep on the assembly line? Make it make sense, people. Okay, now that I have that out of my system, let's talk about bonus content. One reason people absolutely love Star Ocean Until the End of Time is the sheer volume of unique challenges. You can realistically spend 1,000 plus hours in the game and still not 100% all the battle trophies. Collecting battle trophies also grants extra costumes for each character as well as additional difficulty levels to reward your dedication. But battle trophies aside, the extra bonus dungeons are insane and take more time than the main game, with the need to utilize every resource that the game gives you just to have a fighting chance against those super bosses. Remember, just leveling up won't help you at this stage in the game. What I find even more endearing is how the game leans into the we live in a simulation aspect in these dungeons, as well as the inclusion of gods from other Triads games like Valkyrie Profile. In a lot of ways, these bonus dungeons feel like areas of the Eternal Sphere that were designed for the users in 4D to access only, giving the game an extra layer of depth that's missing from the main story. At the time of release in 2003, I wouldn't be surprised if Star Ocean Until the End of Time would have broken the record for most content in any video game. Even to this day, I don't think any other game comes close outside of its own sequels, and the impressive part about this is it's not just bloat or boring fetch quest. These are real unique challenges that don't exist to waste the player's time. Okay, maybe a few of the battle trophies do, but even without the battle trophies, this game has hundreds of hours worth of real content, unlike Ubisoft games. For this alone, I can understand why fans of this game don't just like it, but absolutely love it. Had the game been just the main campaign with no extras, mine and many others' opinions would be greatly diminished. And lastly, the story. At the end of the day, the story has multiple points that may sour the player's experience, with the reveal in 4D space being the biggest make or break for fans. Considering I didn't even know that Star Ocean Until the End of Time was part of an established series, I didn't see an issue with everything being a simulation, although the execution was admittedly limp. Having replayed the game with hindsight, the time on Elicoor II should have been cut in half, with more focus building up to the twist instead of jumping from chilling on an underdeveloped planet to the universe about to end. More hints and foreshadowing as well as more time to emphasize the themes would have gone a long way. In some ways, I feel like the game was intended to be a lot longer, but the team had to condense the second half, which ultimately killed the pacing. One other thing not mentioned is that the world's lore is very fleshed out with this whole encyclopedia that can explain most questions that people would have had, that updates itself as you play through the game so you don't spoil anything. Huh, that's why the Vendini look so damn ugly. They're literally fish people. As for the characters, there are just so many of them with very minor importance. So much so that I've skipped over about 80% of the named characters in this video that appear in cutscenes with actual lines. And for the characters that are important enough to mention, their personalities don't shine through in any meaningful way. As bad as that sounds though, it's better than dealing with whiny characters like in Star Ocean The Last Hope.
Raimi was upset. You really can be a pain sometimes, you know that?
You done?
Overall, the story suffers from the same issues as the combat and the item creation to some extent, by simply being far too ambitious. Now that we've seen the opinions and reviews of many, I'd like to end things off by giving it my own score. For combat, I think an 8.5 out of 10 is fair. It's fun, complex, and unique, even by today's standards. Had it had more time in the oven to iron out the stiffness and remove some of the stun locking capabilities from enemies, this could have been a 10 out of 10, but unfortunately, I have to judge it for what it is. For the story, I'll give it a 7.5 out of 10, which falls in line with my feelings about the combat. Had the pacing been managed better with more care towards the latter half of the game with more fleshed out characters, the story could have been a 10 out of 10. For optional content, that's a 10 out of 10 at the magnum opus of the entire package. Puzzles and minigames get a 4 out of 10, with the turtle section weighing this down considerably due to it being mandatory with the rest of the puzzle ranging from inoffensive to frustrating. Something I don't suggest very often is removing all mandatory minigames and puzzles from a game, but when the choice is to have none, or have the ones given that are mandatory in this game, I'll opt for the former. Music is a solid 8 out of 10. It works for the game and fits the themes on screen, but doesn't have enough to make the tracks memorable or want to listen to the OTS by itself. Even Persona 3 took one of this game's tracks and got it stuck into people's heads before Star Ocean was able to. Crafting gets a 7 out of 10 for being too mandatory and complex to reasonably approach without outside help unless you want to light all your money on fire. Just like the story and combat, this system could have been, and say it with me folks, a 10 out of 10 had it been finely tuned. With that being said, let's look at the final score and weighting for each category on screen. Both combat and story will make up 35% each since they're the most important aspects of the game, bonus content 10%, puzzles and mandatory minigames 10%, and music and item creation 5% each. So, after running the calculation, we get a final score for Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time, with a score of 7.75 out of 10. Not great, but not bad. The most disappointing part of it all is that this could have been the ambitious masterpiece that it was meant to be, but sadly, great ideas and good intentions aren't enough to cover up poor execution. Would I recommend this game? Yes, I would. Even if you hate the game, I think it's worth experiencing firsthand considering you will never find another JRPG like this one. And for under $20 on the PS2, you'll absolutely get your money's worth if you find the experience remotely enjoyable. There is a rumor floating around that Tri-Ace is looking to possibly remake Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time, which, after everything we just discussed about missed potential, this game out of all games in history has the potential to have the biggest redemption of any controversial game ever made. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. This has been one hell of a video for me to make looking back at a game that's so nostalgic for me from my formative years. If you've made it this far, let me know in the comments your unfiltered opinions about Star Ocean Till the Ends of Time. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Never played it? Also, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you're new to the channel. If this video gets over 1,000 likes, I'll consider going back and doing a retrospective on why the next 2 entries in the series were also hated. But until next time, I've been your host, Fake Alias, and I hope to see you in the next video.